Hi all. So let me start by saying I really don't like the term non-compliance because learning isn't about compliance, it's about engagement. And the fact that we focus more on compliance than engagement and motivation is really at the core of so many classroom struggles we're facing every day. It is very much a self-perpetuating problem. So if you don't already know, every Wednesday at 4 p.m. EST, we do a live Q&A. You can submit your questions through email, through messaging, although I don't always see them when you message, or you can send me a message directly through our website that is linked in my bio. That's the best one. So today we're going to talk about a question I recently got. What is the root of non-compliance? What are the underlying themes? We're going to start with the psychological root. At the root of what we call non-compliance is actually a very important universal human need for autonomy. Autonomy is one of the three psychological needs, the others being competency and belonging. But autonomy is huge. That's why we always emphasize it in our content and resources. And we use what we call the meet the needs theory, which says when you consistently meet five core needs, safety, comfort, autonomy, belonging, and competency, you really set yourself up and your students up for an environment and instruction that has optimal engagement, intrinsic motivation, and optimal brain development for your students. So if you haven't yet, check out the Neurodivergent Toolkit. It breaks down the theory, gives you a ton of tools and templates, and it really makes meeting needs in the classroom doable. You can comment needs and get the link sent directly to you in your DMs. So let's talk about why exerting a lot of control in the classroom backfires. For teachers, especially teachers who are often overwhelmed or are micromanaged, it's really easy to fall into the habit of managing a class through control. That's incredibly tight routines, not a lot of flexibility, use of punishments and rewards. And it's because, well, one, it's often taught that that's how we get order. And two, seeking control is one of the first behaviors of someone who isn't getting their own psychological needs met. And so they tend to overcompensate by exerting high control over environments that they have some control over. It's why the problem is so self-perpetuating. But what the research keeps showing us is that this kind of control actually undermines human motivation. It does a few things. It creates short-term obedience, and that's at the cost of long-term engagement and motivation. It increases anxiety and dysregulation, which increases negative behaviors. And it trains the person to look, or the student to look to adults for direction rather than developing their own internal drive and ability to problem solve. Edutopia has a great piece on this, and it's also mirroring what we hear from educators using the Neurodivergent Toolkit. When external control is the go-to strategy, student interest, engagement, and motivation just totally vanishes. So why does this happen? Why do humans push back when outside forces try to exert control? There's a theory called psychological reactance. Basically, when someone feels their freedom or autonomy is being threatened, they'll do the opposite of what's asked just to reclaim a sense or a feeling of control. And that is all motivated by the survival brain, which we know overpowers our frontal lobe or executive functioning. So when your students or really anyone else starts doing the opposite of what you ask, it is their survival mechanism kicking in, and they can no longer think logically or reason until their fight or flight is turned off. If you want strategies on disengaging the fight or flight, definitely check out our workshop series on regulation. It's called Meet the Needs Workshop Series, and you can come at workshop or you can go to our website. So we see this all the time with our students and our own kids, if you have them. You ask a student to do something, it might sound demanding, and then they refuse, argue, or shut down. And it's not because they hate you or they hate the work, but because they need to feel in charge of something in order to feel safe. And like I said before, this isn't just an adolescent thing. If you have ever had a boss that you don't like and they ask you to do something, you have an urge to do the opposite. But the difference is that you have a fully developed brain and years of practice in controlling that urge because you know how it plays out. This is why so much of the behavior we label as defiant is actually communicating a really important signal that the person needs more say over what is happening to them in the space. If you have the Neurodivergent Toolkit, definitely revisit the behavior and needs detective and check out the common compromises for autonomy. So another type of non-compliance we see is polite disengagement. And it can be even trickier because it's not as loud or noticeable, but it is just as frustrating when you have to catch a student up who has fallen way behind. Super frustrating. We'll see this with the kids who look like they're following directions, but they've completely checked out. The term polite disengagement is actually a term coined by Robin Jackson, who wrote Never Work Harder Than Your Students. And that's a really good book. If you haven't read it, definitely check it out. These students are compliant, yes, but they're completely disconnected. They ask, like, what is the absolute minimum I can do to just pass the class? And it's funny because I did this the year before I dropped out of high school. The only class I was actually doing well in, I decided to skip the final exam because it wouldn't fail me. So I ended up getting a D and just skipped the last part of the class. I absolutely hated school, which is why we're here. The polite disengagement students have learned to meet bare minimum expectations, but at the expense of actual real thinking. They're just following the rules, doing whatever they need to get by. So how does all of this tie into the behavior we're seeing in the classroom? When students feel they have no say, misbehavior becomes a form of reclaiming power. But when teachers build classrooms to support autonomy, where kids have choice, voice, ownership, and say, you're going to see the behavioral issues that come from the need to reclaim power drop. There's a pretty popular meta-analysis that was done a while ago that shows classrooms with higher teacher autonomy support have fewer behavioral problems and lower classroom anxiety. And it showed when teachers micromanage or deny choice, misbehavior actually increases. This is especially important if you're working with neurodivergent learners who are even more sensitive to power imbalances and control dynamics, or students who have a trauma response. If you want to learn more about that, definitely check out the Neurodivergent Toolkit. You can just comment needs. And finally, the neuroscience. So we've been talking about the striatum for a while, which is a part of the brain that influences attention and goal direction. And we know that self-determined, goal-directed, interest-driven activities give us a lot of dopamine. When learning is tied to personal choice or curiosity, it activates brain systems tied to motivation, memory, and problem solving. But when students are forced, coerced with rewards or punishments, or controlled, those same systems are going to shut down because the loss of autonomy flips on the limbic system and the sympathetic nervous system takes over. And that's our fight or flight. That's why autonomy is not just a nice to have, it's absolutely foundational if we want to decrease the behaviors that we're seeing in today's classrooms. So if you've been wondering why non-compliance keeps popping up in your classroom, we need to stop looking at only behavior and start looking at the unmet needs, especially the need for autonomy. If you want over 100 strategies, tips, and suggestions, along with how needs are often compromised in the classroom, comment needs to get the link to the Neurodivergent Toolkit. You'll get it instantly so that you can begin to solve the issues we talked about in today's live. You've got this. I believe in you, and together we're going to change what classrooms and learning look like. I will see you all Monday at 4 p.m. EST for teacher coaching tidbits, and I hope you all have a fantastic